Happy Information Wednesday, Chalyce McQueen here. I'm going to be talking about Airbnbs today and how your traditional homeowners policy is not going to provide the protection that you need, so stay tuned. I thought it'd be first important to go through what types of homeowner policies are available. Of course, you have a traditional policy, which is where you own or occupy the property. The next one would be like secondary. So say you have a property that you occupy 6 months or less out of the year. That's kind of your secondary residence. You then have a landlord policy, which is for a long-term tenant, so 12 months or more. And then you have, of course, your short-term or seasonal, as we call it, which is basically someone occupying the property for under 32 days or less. And that actually is going to be what you need for an Airbnb. You also have a policy for a vacant property. So whether you're selling your property or you're moving out temporarily, whatever the story may be, you want to make sure that you do change your policy to a vacant policy. And the reason being, if you don't, and people discover, or the insurance company, not people, discover that you actually have not been living there, the theft coverage basically goes away with a policy. But back to the interest of what we're talking about today, and that's actually having a short-term rental or Airbnb. I wanted to kind of give you guys my skill set today as a 14-year real estate broker and, of course, the insurance agent as well, and kind of give you a double whammy as far as what you should be doing and what you should not be doing with your Airbnb. So number one, without a doubt, you need to make sure you have the proper insurance coverage. Like I said, if the insurance company discovers that the property is not properly insured, you will have coverage denied. And unfortunately, the main reason why a traditional policy does not cover is because the word guest really is invited people in your home. And although technically you're authorizing people to stay in your property, it really is a business transaction, not a guest transaction. So that's kind of the main determining factor that insurance companies consider. For Airbnb, if you were to go through their website, they do offer an insurance protection. I think it's called host protection is what they call it on their service. The problem with that, it's up to $1 million policy, which in the grand scheme of things really isn't enough coverage. So by just relying on their policy alone, you're going to have a ton of exposed liability. So I'm a firm believer of always kind of having my bases covered in more than one area. So for example, when I go rent a rental car, I always buy their insurance because number one, I don't want my insurance rate going up because something that happened to, their crappy $20,000 car that probably was already damaged by someone else that I'm taking the blame for. So I always buy the rental car insurance, even though I have my own great insurance. Same thing with obviously the Airbnb. If you're going that route, I would utilize their insurance. It's always good to have kind of co-insurance as we talk about it. But again, their policy as a blanket, as I was saying, Airbnb's host coverage is not going to be enough by itself at $1 million. And you may think that having your own $1 million policy is going to be enough. But I've given you guys case studies in the past where an aunt was jumping on a trampoline with her nephew and they kind of jumped a certain way and her foot cracked. And so basically she broke her foot, no harm, no foul, but she was awarded $860,000+ for having a broken foot and, future pain and suffering. Who knows all the lingo that was involved in that lawsuit, but she sued her family. So things definitely happen. And these are perfect strangers that are coming into your home. So I think it's very important to have your own liability policy at $1 million, and of course to have an umbrella policy up to $2 million for any excess liability upon that. Another great reason to have, of course, landlord and short-term rental policy versus traditional is you're going to get loss of rents in there. So things happen, whether you had your property kind of break down and you had an incident, we're not able to get the rent. Or of course, any other secondary damage that is basically messing with your income potential. That is where that insurance policy comes in. And that can be structured all different kind of ways. It could be a percentage, it could be a flat amount. It could be up to 2 years, 1 year, whatever the policy allows for loss of rent in the event that you had, say, a fire and a complete tear down. I also think it's important to have business liability insurance when you are running an Airbnb operation. Again, you're running a business. It's not as simple as I'm letting someone stay at my house and I'm just getting benefit. I'm getting the benefit by being paid. It is not that simplistic. You do need to make sure you have all your bases covered to obviously prepare for the unknown and the added risk that you're assuming on a daily basis every time you rent that property out. Also, I think it's important to have the property titled in an LLC. Don't keep it in your own personal name. That just, again, leaves a lot of risk and liability to tap into other parts of your life. Lastly, one thing that I require all of my renters, whether they're short-term or long-term, is they're required to have their own renter's insurance. I know it seems silly to possibly make someone have renter's insurance for a week or a month or whatever the process may be as far as their duration, but it's important that you you have co-insurance. You want to make sure all your basis is covered, and that way too, if they have an incident, they can file on their insurance. Like I said, they can file on their own insurance instead of you having to file on yours. Again, you're dealing with humans here. There's a ton of human error that takes place. The smallest things. I have a client that unfortunately the toaster caught fire and did quite a bit of damage to the kitchen. So just things happen naturally, whether it's an act of God or an act of stupid, things happen. And so it's important to make sure that you have the proper coverage and you have an agent like me on your side that has the history of knowing portfolio management, obviously tenant processes, etc. And of course, having all your bases covered for your insurance needs and having the proper coverage at all time. So are you protected? Give me a call and find out, 602-525-5665, or you can always email me at cmcqueen@farmersagent.com. As always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.